Dad beamed, clapping him on the back. Great job, son. Then, the room went dead silent as Mom turned her cold, calculating eyes toward me. You'll handle the kids, of course. We've already volunteered you as their full-time caregiver. I froze, the air leaving my lungs. Absolutely not, I said, standing my ground. My sister-in-law's fake smile instantly vanished, snapping bitterly. You have no family of your own, Sophie. This is your training. You owe us. I refused to let them exploit me any longer. I grabbed my keys and left without another word, ignoring their screaming voices. I thought the drama ended there. I was wrong. The next morning, my phone vibrated violently on my nightstand. When I answered, a stern voice on the other end chilled me to the bone. Hello, ma'am. This is Officer Daniels. Someone has. My name is Sophie, and at 32 years old, I've finally built a life I'm proud of. I have a peaceful apartment, a successful career, and boundaries I thought were rock solid. But in my family, my boundaries have always been treated as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. You see, my brother has always been the golden child. From the moment he was born, he could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Every mistake he made was swept under the rug, and every whim he had was immediately granted. So, when he and his wife invited us all over for a mandatory family dinner, I already knew a storm was brewing. I just didn't expect to be the target. The moment he announced baby number 5, the room erupted. My parents cheered as if he'd won a Nobel Prize, completely ignoring the fact that they could barely afford the 4 kids they already had. But the real trap was sprung a second later. When my mother turned her cold eyes toward me and casually volunteered my life away, she wasn't asking, she was ordering. When I said absolutely not, the atmosphere shattered. My sister-in-law's bitter remark about me having no family stung, but it also lit a fire inside me. For years, they used my single status as an excuse to demand my time, my money, and my energy. Leaving that dinner was the hardest thing I've ever done, but as I drove away into the night, I knew everything had changed. The sun hadn't even fully risen the next morning before my phone began to violently vibrate against my nightstand. I groaned, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, only to find a barrage of missed calls and increasingly hostile text messages waiting for me. The primary culprit was my mother, closely followed by my sister-in-law, both of them apparently working in tandem to launch a coordinated guilt trip. Opening the first text, my stomach tightened. My mother wrote that my behavior the previous night was utterly embarrassing and deeply selfish. She claimed that family was supposed to stand together in times of blessing, and that my refusal to step up was actively ruining my brother's happiness. Before I could even process that, a massive paragraph from my sister-in-law popped up. She didn't mince words. She laid out a blatant demand, stating that since my job allowed a hybrid schedule, I needed to immediately restructure my working hours or request a transition to part-time status. According to her, my corporate career was just a distraction compared to the sacred duty of raising the next generation of our bloodline. They weren't just asking for occasional babysitting. They were demanding a full-time, unpaid nanny, completely disregarding my financial stability and personal independence. They truly believed that because I didn't have a husband or children of my own, my time belonged entirely to them. It was a toxic ultimatum wrapped in false moral superiority, designed to force me into submission. They assumed that if they squeezed me hard enough, I would break and fold just like I always used to in the past. But this time, they completely miscalculated who they were dealing with. I refused to engage in their madness. Without replying to a single text, I firmly blocked my mother's and sister-in-law's numbers, determined to protect my peace and focus on my actual job. For 2 days, the silence was blissful. I foolishly believed that my silence had finally sent a clear message and that they were backing down. I was completely wrong. On the 3rd afternoon, a loud knock on my apartment door broke the quiet. When I opened it, nobody was there, but a thick, crisp manila legal envelope was sitting on my welcome mat. My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked it up and ripped it open. Inside was an official-looking document drafted by a cheap local attorney friend of my brother. It was a formal caregiver custody and accommodation agreement. The terms were absolutely delusional. It demanded that I legally commit to hosting my brother's two oldest children in my spare bedroom starting next month to alleviate household strain. It even hinted that if I refused to cooperate, they would get from our grandparents' old estate. It was a blatant, manufactured threat disguised as legal paperwork designed to terrify me into compliance. They were escalating the psychological warfare, trying to prove they could force their way into my home and my life, whether I liked it or not. They wanted me to feel entirely trapped. The legal threat was the final straw, but my brother wasn't done trying to bully me. The very next evening, a violent pounding rattled my front door so hard the frame shook. I crept over and looked through the peephole. It was my brother, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. Knowing exactly what kind of unhinged confrontation was coming, I immediately took out my phone and hit record before opening the door just a crack, keeping the security chain firmly engaged. The moment he saw my face, he launched into a massive, breathless tantrum right there in the hallway. He screamed that my selfishness was actively ruining his marriage, causing his wife unbearable stress, and directly endangering the future of his unborn child. He claimed that my refusal to take the kids was forcing them into financial ruin. As he yelled, his voice echoed loudly through the entire building. I didn't say a single word. I just kept my phone pointed directly at him, capturing every venomous insult and aggressive gesture. Within minutes, the commotion grew too loud to ignore. Several neighbors opened their doors, shouting that they were calling building security and the police if he didn't leave immediately. Realizing he was outnumbered and being filmed, my brother pointed a finger at me, fiercely promising that I would pay for turning my back on blood. He turned on his heel and fled down the stairwell. I locked the door, my hands trembling as I saved the video. They had officially crossed a line from family drama into dangerous harassment, but they had no idea I was documenting everything. That sleepless, terrifying night finally gave way to dawn, but the true nightmare was only just beginning. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, staring blankly into a mug of black coffee, when my phone suddenly vibrated violently against the marble countertop. The caller ID didn't show my mother or my brother this time. It was an unknown, official government number. My heart skipped a beat as I pressed the phone to my ear. When I answered, a stern, authoritative voice on the other end instantly chilled me to the bone. "Hello, ma'am. This is Officer Daniels from the local precinct. Someone has filed a serious emergency report involving your address." My breath hitched in my throat as the officer explained the situation. It turned out that my brother and parents had concocted a desperate, malicious scheme to force my hand. In a fit of absolute panic and spite, they had called the authorities and falsely claimed that I had illegally abandoned my young nieces and nephews after pulling them away from their parents' home. They explicitly told the police that the children were currently trapped inside my locked apartment without food or supervision. But their elaborate lie completely backfired. When Officer Daniels and his partner arrived at the building, they first checked with the front desk and reviewed our high-definition hallway security cameras. The footage clearly proved that no children had ever entered my unit, but it perfectly captured my brother's aggressive, screaming tantrum from the night before. The police immediately realized the entire report was a malicious fabrication, and now they were the ones facing severe legal trouble for filing a false emergency report. Armed with the shocking revelation from Officer Daniels, the fear that had consumed me for days instantly transformed into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I refused to be a passive victim of their twisted games any longer. I gathered my things, drove straight to the local precinct, and walked into the station with my head held high. I was completely done protecting people who were actively trying to destroy my life. I sat down with the investigators and laid out every single piece of evidence I had meticulously collected. I showed them the relentless, harassing text messages demanding I sacrifice my career, the delusional caregiver contract they had left on my doorstep, and, most importantly, the clear video footage of my brother's unhinged hallway tantrum. Combined with the building's own high-definition security cameras, the evidence against them was absolute and undeniable. Instead of backing down or accepting a half-hearted family apology, I looked the officers in the eye and pressed full legal charges for harassment, stalking, and filing a malicious false police report. The authorities moved swiftly. When the police showed up at my parents' house to issue the citations and arrest warrants, the reality of the situation finally crashed down on them. The golden child and his enablers realized that their desperate plot had completely blown up in their faces. There would be no free caregiver, no forced compliance, and absolutely no sweeping this under the rug. They were finally going to face real, unyielding legal consequences for their cruelty. 3 months have passed since that fateful day at the police station, and the silence has been absolutely beautiful. Following their legal disaster, I went completely no contact with my parents and my brother, blocking them across every single platform and changing my locks. Cut off from their favorite scapegoat, they were forced to face the massive financial strain and community embarrassment entirely on their own. My brother had to face a judge for his false report, and his wife is now scrambling to handle 5 children without any free labor. Standing up to them was terrifying, but at 32 years old, I've finally learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. I am finally the author of my own life, accountable to no one but myself. Now, I'm curious about all of you who listen to my story. What would you do if your own family tried to volunteer your entire life away? Would you have pressed charges, or would you have handled it differently? Let me know your thoughts on the final screen. 2 other incredible stories from our